I've been married to Drake for 3 years, and we were considered a model couple in the eyes of everyone. However, I know that this marriage was the result of my relentless pursuit. I loved him for 7 years, but he never loved me. His heart only belonged to his first love. Even when I was seriously ill, and at the moment of my death, he still didn't show up. My heart finally died. In a second life, I filed for divorce, but he cried with red eyes and begged me, saying he regretted it. 1. I've died once. Not just physically, but emotionally too. I chased Drake for 7 years and was married to him for 10 whole years, and in the end, all my sincerity was fed to the dogs. Everyone said that Drake and I were a match made in heaven, and I used to think so too. He was superficially gentle towards me, but never truly cared. Always accommodating my requests, but never taking the initiative. He was impeccable in his actions, but lacked warmth. I originally thought that was just how he was, until his first love, Leona, returned to the country. She was a flamboyant, stunning beauty, completely different from me, a quiet person. And only then did I realize that he could also be so sincere, passionate, full, and proactive. When I held the pregnancy result to share with him, he was watching the scenery with Leona by the river. When I lay in the hospital bed, begging him not to leave, he rushed out of the ward because of a call from Leona. At the last moment of my life, looking at the phone that was always in a call, I threw it into the water. I didn't want to cry anymore. My tears had dried up. Countless disappointments and sorrows weaved a fine net, firmly binding me. In this life, all my joys and sorrows were because of this man, but he never loved me. I asked him, "Have you ever, even for a second, had any genuine feelings for me?" His silence answered everything. It turned out that these 10 years had been my one-man show. I was just being delusional. My heart stopped. Love stopped too. And when I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital examination room, still holding 2 medical examination reports and a diagnosis. Heaven played a joke on me. A month after I got pregnant, I was diagnosed with cancer. "Mabel, you're finally awake." With tears falling on my shoulder, I felt a warm embrace. "Sister?" Looking at the familiar gentle face in front of me, and looking at the diagnosis, I was stunned. I was actually reborn. I went back 3 months ago. My sister rubbed my head and cried. She couldn't believe that her young sister didn't have much time left. I hugged her and cried in her arms. But it wasn't because of fear of death. But thanks to God, it's good. There's still a chance to live for myself just once. Even if there are only 3 months. It's also a gift. When I returned to that cold home from the hospital, Drake was not there. Of course he wasn't. If I remember correctly, he should be flying kites with Leona by the river at this time. I didn't expect this man who never smiled in front of me would actually do something like flying a kite, which seemed completely out of his character. Is that the power of true love? It just makes me look more like a joke. 3. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. It didn't connect. I dialed again. On the 3rd try, a familiar voice finally came from the other end. "Mabel, I'm in a meeting. We'll talk about it later." Drake's voice was cold, revealing no abnormality. I used to be kept in the dark by him. Now I know that he told many lies like this. And without exception, it was always because he was with Leona. I gripped the phone tightly and spoke calmly. "Come back now. I have something very important to tell you." There was a silence on the other end. "Don't be unreasonable. I'll go back when I'm done with work. Don't wait for me to eat dinner tonight." Beep, the phone hung up. And in the last second before the phone disconnected, I heard a woman's sweet laughter from the other end. "Drake, where are we going to play later?" I held the phone and laughed. I was really blind in my previous life. I actually hypnotized myself time and time again. Thinking he was busy, he didn't have time. He had his reasons. Now I just want to laugh. I decisively found the marriage certificate in the cabinet and went into the bedroom to pack my luggage one by one. I took off the usual white cotton linen shirt and changed into a completely black but gorgeous suspender dress and put on the most beautiful and intense makeup I thought. Before marriage, although I was quiet, I loved music and rock, and I often wore heavy makeup and appeared at various music festivals. After marriage, in order to try my best to play the role of Drake's wife, I had to give up my career and hobbies, only wearing the most simple white cotton linen and quietly and obediently being a good wife. But today was different. I was really tired of pretending to be this gentle and virtuous wife. And I don't want to play boring house games with anyone anymore. I want my freedom back. 4. I don't have much stuff, just a few clothes, some toiletries, and a suitcase is enough. I printed out 2 copies of the divorce agreement and put them on the coffee table. Just then the door was pushed open. Drake walked in. He saw me, his face darkened, and he naturally scolded me. "What tricks are you playing dressed like that? I told you I was busy. Go change your clothes quickly. How can you look like a wife at all?" I sneered. He actually thought I was throwing a tantrum. I looked at him and walked towards him slowly. He frowned and took a step back. "Mabel, what are you doing?" He had the scent of a woman's perfume on him, and there was a pink lipstick mark on his neck. I laughed very loudly. Drake looked at me like I was crazy, and his tone was unpleasant. "Mabel, what's wrong with you?" Looking at this man I've loved for so many years, his dislike was written all over his expression of disgust and impatience. Time and time again, so obvious, and yet I, like a fool, plunged into it, exhausting myself. I finished laughing at myself for being so stupid and naive. I heard my own voice, speaking in the calmest tone I've ever used in these 20 years. "Drake, let's get a divorce." 5. After a brief silence, "What did you say?" Drake narrowed his eyes, as if he couldn't believe that someone who had always obeyed him would say such a thing. His face turned cold instantly. "You were the one who begged me to get married, and now you're the one talking about divorce. What are you trying to do?" I ignored him and laughed to myself. "Yes, I was the one who pestered you, so I deserve it. Now I've figured it out. I don't want to pester you anymore. It's good to make room for Leona, isn't it?" He was suddenly a little flustered, his eyes darted around, and he paused. "She and I are just work colleagues, nothing more." Just then the doorbell rang. Drake didn't move. I walked over and opened the door. Leona saw me. Her expression froze for a moment. Then she put on an impeccable smile, looking enthusiastic and generous. She smiled and stood at the door. "Hello, I'm Drake's colleague. He left something at my place." I took a look. It was Drake's most commonly used brooch. I looked up at her, her eyes hidden a hint of defiance and comparison. I smiled at her and dragged my suitcase out. "I'm leaving, he's inside. You guys can chat." Leona was a little surprised, but she didn't say anything. I turned and went into the elevator, watching Leona go into the house. And Drake didn't come out to find me. The last bit of hope in my heart finally disappeared completely. I took out my phone and edited a text message. "Contact me when the divorce agreement is signed. See you directly at the Civil Affairs Bureau." Drake didn't reply. The sun was shining outside, reminding me of this time 3 years ago, when I walked in with a joyful mood, and now, I was going out with dignity. I dragged my suitcase and tried to jump a few steps, trying to find the feeling of my youth. But suddenly a sharp pain came, and I fell directly to the ground. Blood began to flow from the root of my thigh. I was sent to the hospital by passers-by. Lying in the hospital, there was the smell of disinfectant all around. Drake came this time. His shirt was wrinkled, and it looked like he had rushed out when he received the call. He sat on the bed and looked at me, and his first words were a question. "Why didn't you tell me?" Listening to this blaming tone, I lay down and started laughing so hard that my abdomen started to hurt again. Drake looked at me incredulously. I must look like a lunatic now. I stopped laughing and said coldly, "When can President Drake's calls get through? You're either in a meeting or on a date. How dare I disturb you?" He was startled, but it wasn't that he felt he was wrong, or that he was really reflecting on anything. But he was incredible that the woman who used to be obedient to him would say such sarcastic words. And he was angry to be offended by a woman who used to adore him. His face was ugly, and he subconsciously got up to leave. But because of the eyes of the people around him, and my identity as a miscarriage patient, he stood for a while and then sat down again. "Don't make a fuss, okay? Mabel, nothing happened between me and Leona. You're just too sensitive. I'll explain to you when we get home." 6. Too sensitive. I no longer wanted to pay attention to his boring excuses. If the hospital hadn't contacted this legally undivorced object, I wouldn't even want to tell him about these things. In the past, when I was confronted with his questioning, I might feel wronged, and I might burst into tears immediately. But at this moment, I felt genuinely tired. I closed my eyes and stopped talking. Drake noticed that I was different from usual. He was silent for a while, then reached out and took my hand. This was the first time he had taken my hand on his own initiative. He awkwardly comforted me. "Mabel, don't worry. We'll have another child." Strange. Even though my tears had dried up, my nose was still sore. Yes, he cares about the child. He cares about his career. But he just doesn't care about me. I felt the temperature from his hand and the unclear emotions in his eyes. And I was about to say something. His phone suddenly rang. He looked at me, then at his phone. He went out to answer it. His voice came faintly from outside the room. "I'm at the hospital." "What? Where are you? Don't be afraid." "Okay, I'll be right there." He came back in and looked at me apologetically. "Sorry, Mabel, there's something urgent at the company. I've already hired a nanny for you. She'll come to take care of you later." The impulse I had just felt a sore nose instantly turned into numbness. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. I've gotten used to him leaving me at any time. I don't matter at all, do I? Then why pretend and lie? Isn't that disgusting? Looking at his feigned concern, I suddenly felt a little nauseous. Ugh, I vomited, but I hadn't eaten anything. My mouth was full of blood. I was dizzy and wanted to find a piece of paper to wipe my mouth, but I fell off the bed. Perhaps my appearance was too scary. Drake stopped walking. He quickly called the doctor and nurse and rushed over to help me up. My brain was dizzy, and the extreme physical pain made it difficult for me to break free from the arms of this man who disgusted me. He held me with a cold sweat on his face. "Mabel. Mabel, can you hear me? Mabel." I was dazed and let out a self-mocking laugh before I fainted. "Drake, meeting you is really the worst luck in 8 lifetimes." 7. I was pushed into the operating room in a daze. I lay there for over 10 hours. When I woke up, I saw my sister. She had been crying so much that she was a mess, her face full of tears. I reached out and stroked her arm comfortingly. She quickly wiped away her tears, and I sat up from the hospital bed and hugged her. "Sister, it was my fault. I didn't listen to your advice and insisted on marrying someone who didn't love me." She started sobbing again. Our parents died early, and we had always depended on each other to grow up. We had a very good relationship. When I was about to get married before, she had been trying to persuade me, but I was like someone poisoned by a love brain. Regardless of the consequences, I had to insist on a relationship that didn't belong to me. How stupid I was. I touched my sister's swollen eyes. "Shall we get a divorce and live together, sister? You won't dislike me for being a patient, will you?" She pretended to hit me. "Silly girl. What are you talking about? How could I dislike you?" I smiled at her and wiped away her tears. Sure enough, in the final stage of life, it is the truth to spend it with family who love you as well. Drake rushed over a few hours after I woke up. He was holding flowers and supplements. He thought I was just having complications from a miscarriage, until the doctor told him that my condition was not very good. He was stunned on the spot, his face ugly. My sister ignored him, and I didn't want to talk to him either. But he stayed in the ward. While he was clumsily peeling an apple for me, he kept apologizing to me. I didn't expect the always arrogant him to actually lower his head. "I'm sorry, Mabel, I'm an asshole, please forgive me." He handed me the apple, which was cut into a mess. It's a pity, but he still had that scent of perfume on him. I didn't take the apple, I just felt extremely disgusted. I turned my back to him, and my tone was calm. "Drake, besides signing the divorce agreement and going to get the certificate, don't come to find me again. Mabel, I don't want to hear anything meaningless anymore. You can go." After a brief silence, Drake still left. When he left, he only said one sentence: "I won't divorce you. No matter what, you are my wife." I sneered. It suddenly rained outside. I think I should listen to music, learn to paint, and go everywhere with my sister, doing everything I want to do. As for that marriage, since I'm going to die anyway, love it or leave it. It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing about Drake matters anymore. 8. After I strongly requested to be discharged from the hospital, they saw that my condition was stabilizing and let me go. Arm in arm with my sister, we walked home, chatting about the past and the happy things we did as children. For the first time in 10 years, I felt so at ease. No more anxiety or panic, no more fear of a cold face, no more fear of hearing his phone ring. In the past, I was also a shining girl, a little sun that everyone would praise. But at that time, in order to marry Drake, I gave up a lot, and naturally I didn't go abroad. The light on me disappeared after entering the family, and I was often disliked by Drake. He said I couldn't cook, so I tried hard to learn to cook. He said I wasn't gentle enough, so I stopped opposing all his opinions. I wasn't myself anymore. Fortunately, I can start over. I started picking up the piano, which I loved most. My dream was to be a pianist, and I even got an offer to study abroad. My sister found me a piano room in a music school, allowing me to practice in the piano room after the students finished class. One day, a man leaned against the door listening to my playing. "You play so beautifully, what piece is this?" "Heavenly Grace." I replied, "You play very well." He clapped. From then on, I could meet him every day when I went to the piano room to practice. He was my long-lost first audience, and he said his name was Chase. Occasionally we would chat, mostly about music. When we got excited, he would pick up the violin and accompany me. We got closer and closer. Many things can be sensed without having to say them explicitly, but I knew I couldn't do that. I was a person with only a few months left, and I couldn't delay the other person like that. On that very night, after we almost kissed, I ran away and never went to the piano room again. And that very night, Drake appeared in front of me again. He was drenched in the rain, standing motionless at the door. I didn't want to pay any attention to him, but my sister said he had been standing there for 3 hours, and if I let him stand like that, something might happen. So I waved to him. He hesitated for a moment, and a look of joy appeared on his face. I was stunned, and my heart was filled with mixed emotions. It was as if I saw myself in the past, so foolishly waiting for him, and showing such ignorant joy when I saw him. I subconsciously softened my attitude and got a towel for him. After a long silence, he was the first to speak. "Mabel, it was all my fault. I didn't know how to cherish you." He lowered his head, his whole body exuding a dejected aura, his voice hoarse. If it were me before, I might have softened my heart, but I won't be so easily deceived now. I looked at him leisurely. "What about Leona? Don't you cherish her anymore?" When he heard my words, his body stiffened noticeably. Seeing his reaction, I knew that he and Leona had not cut off contact, and naturally it was impossible for him to have nothing to do with her, as he said. She and I are not what you think. She just returned to China. She is not familiar with many things, and she doesn't have any friends in China, so I just spent more time with her." I really felt like I had never seen through Drake before. I walked forward and looked into his eyes. Word by word, "You took good care of her. When I was at home waiting for you alone, you were also with her. When I had a miscarriage, you went to find her. When I got sick, you went to find her. You told so many lies just to accompany her. So what about me? Drake, what am I?" Drake opened his mouth and then fell silent again. "I'm sorry to you." The previous forbearance and dignity finally broke down at this moment, and a lot of unreasonable anger welled up in my heart. "Sorry," just 3 light words. In exchange for my 10 years, I stepped forward and slapped him. He just sat there motionless. "Get out of here." I was furious and shouted at him. Just then his phone rang. He took out his phone, and I snatched it away, but I heard Leona's voice inside. "Brother Drake, how's the negotiation going? Without Mabel's shares, we won't be able to vote at the board meeting this time." I hung up the phone directly. Subconsciously, a mocking smile appeared on my face. "No, Mabel, it's not like that." Drake stood up directly, grabbed the phone in a panic, his face turned pale. A sentence flashed through my mind. "Love brain needs to dig for 18 years of vegetables. This is the price of a love brain." 9. I sat down and poured myself a glass of water. "So that's it, Drake. I was wondering why President Drake would come to apologize. So it was for those shares. Those shares were transferred to me by your father when we got married. As long as you sign the divorce agreement, I will return them to you intact. Drake's lips moved, as if he was a little embarrassed. Those shares are very important to me, Mabel. Then sign it. I have extra copies of the divorce agreement here. Can't we start over? You only have a few months left. Isn't it better for me to be with you? I can cook for you, take you to see the scenery. We still have a chance. He suddenly became emotional. His eyes were red, and tears rolled down his cheeks. This was the first time he had cried in front of me. People's joys and sorrows are not the same. At least now, I just feel that these are crocodile tears. I looked at Drake as if I were looking at a stranger. I threw a divorce agreement at him and handed him a pen. Sign it. 10. I met Drake again at the company. I came here with the equity transfer contract. Unsurprisingly, I saw Leona. She came up to greet me. Mabel, long time no see. I walked straight past her. Her face was a little embarrassed. I heard a lot of whispers around me. Leona, that little third party, is always flirting with men, and she even hooked up with President Drake. Or else how do you think she climbed so fast? Did you hear that President Drake is going to divorce because of her? I ignored them and just walked over. But I found a familiar face in the boardroom. Chase. He was a little stunned when he saw me, but he only hesitated for a second before he smiled at me. I also smiled at him subconsciously. Drake suddenly walked over. Director Chase, this is Mabel I told you about. She is here to transfer the equity. With hers added, we can win the vote this time. Chase looked at us both with interest. He had also heard the rumors outside. Is this President Drake's wife? She's a beauty. The one outside. He glanced at Leona standing outside the office door. Drake's face froze instantly. We've already divorced, I replied first. We have nothing to do with each other, and I hope Director Chase won't say that casually. Chase walked closer to me and asked straightforwardly, since that's the case, can I pursue you now? Drake's face looked even uglier, and the people outside the office were also stunned when they heard this. I was even more surprised to look at Chase, but there was only sincerity in his beautiful eyes, no joking at all. I didn't know what to say for a moment, so I could only avoid his gaze. Let's sign the equity contract first. We completed the signing in an awkward atmosphere, and the only one who wasn't embarrassed was Chase. His eyes followed me without a trace. I could only flee, but when I went downstairs, I bumped into Leona again. She looked at me coldly. I can't believe MS. Mabel is so good at hooking men. I frowned, but then smiled and retorted mercilessly. Don't flatter yourself. I always get along with people honestly. How can I be as good as MS? Leona at being a mistress who loves to work in the gutter. Leona was so angry that she even tried to hit me. I took a small step back and was leaning against someone's arms. It was Chase. Drake came down too. He glared at Leona, and Leona reluctantly put away her expression that wanted to eat people. Director Chase, then I won't see you out. He looked at me with a complicated expression, opened his mouth but said nothing. Chase nodded to him. He protectively escorted me to his car with a familiar gesture. 11. In the car. So, you ran away that night because of him? Chase sat in the car, looking at Drake's back, and asked me who was forced to sit in the passenger seat. I shook my head. It's not him. He's not worth it. Chase suddenly leaned over very close to me. I subconsciously dodged and met his side face. I have to admit, he is more charming than Drake. At first, I was a face control, and I fell in love with Drake's face. But the person in front of me is obviously no less attractive than Drake, and there is a hint of casual laziness. He helped me fasten my seat belt, but instead of returning to the driver's seat, he looked down at me. What I said just now is true. Will you consider me? I heard my heart racing. But why? Why do I have less than 3 months to live? I can't give him an answer. I turned my head silently, not wanting him to see the mist in my eyes. He sighed and said nothing more. All the way silent, he drove me home. You play the piano very well. I can see that you love the piano very much. Come to the piano room if you have time. I have a gift for you. After saying that, he left directly. 12. I didn't go out, I just listened to music. The next day, I ran my fingers over the sheet music, playing the piano in the air. On the third day, I followed my heart and went out. But I saw a figure I didn't want to see at the door. Drake was sitting on the flower bed at the door. I don't know how long he had been sitting there. When he saw me, he walked towards me and handed me a box of pastries. Mabel, this is the osmanthus cake you love. I waited in line for a long time to buy it for you. Try it. He observed my expression, his eyes filled with some expectation, and his expression was cautiously careful, which I had never seen before. How much I used to be like him. I suppressed the heartache in my heart and calmly took the pastry. I'll take the pastry, Drake. Don't come looking for me anymore, we're over. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. Why? Why are you suddenly so ruthless? Is it because of Chase? He suddenly became angry, and the force with which he grabbed me increased. I struggled in vain, so I kicked him. I almost subconsciously yelled at him. Drake, what are you crazy about? You're the one who cheated, and you've been ignoring me for 10 years. What's wrong? You couldn't see me when I was always around you. And now that you've lost me, you want to win me back? Are you masochistic? Drake suddenly cried. He was kicked by me and sat on the ground, looking at me and crying. I'm sorry, Mabel. I regret it. I really regret it. Please, give me another chance, okay? I looked down at him, the man I had loved for 10 years. It turned out he could regret it too. I reached out to him and pulled him up from the ground, patting the dust off his clothes. My tone was calm. Drake, I'm really tired of loving you for these 10 years. Every cold and hurtful thing you do will leave a mark. There's no regret medicine in this world. So, I don't want you anymore. I smiled at him gently. Besides, I don't have much time left. At least in this last time, I want to live for myself. 13. After sending Drake away, I suddenly felt relieved. What I just said was for him to hear, but also for myself to hear. I thought of Chase, and of my dream of playing the piano. Why not give myself another chance? If you want to dream, even if it's just like a moth to a flame, burning yourself out is considered a win. If you want a relationship, as long as I give my all and get a passionate return, what does it matter if it's only 3 months? Meeting is fate. When fate comes, I cherish it. And when it's time to say goodbye, I won't regret anything anymore. Just like this rain, it keeps falling, but I know it will eventually clear up. I rushed to the piano room, and there was indeed a familiar figure standing there. I rushed forward and hugged him tightly around his neck. Chase seemed surprised by my initiative, but his beautiful eyes were already filled with laughter. He had been waiting for me to come. I smiled at him, and I gently leaned in and kissed his lips. We could both hear each other's heartbeat. Chase gave me a brand new piano, a piano that belonged only to me. When I was a child, I always wanted a piano of my own, but my family couldn't afford it at that time. After that, I had money, but I gave up my dream of playing the piano for Drake. So naturally, I didn't consider buying a piano anymore. Unexpectedly, I now have a piano of my own. 14. I was so excited I could burst. I dragged Chase and my sister around, playing the piano for them day and night. Being able to share my piano with the people I love and my sister during this final time is the happiest thing. However, there were some small incidents during this period. I was woken up by a phone call in the middle of the night, and when I answered, I heard Leona crying. She sounded drunk and was mumbling, "Mabel, how can you have everything? Clearly, I was the first one to know Drake, but you were the one who married Drake. Now that you're divorced, he keeps talking about you and refuses to see me anymore. Why? You have a sister, you have Drake, and you also have Chase. You have the love of so many people. Why don't I have anything? Why are you so lucky? I'm not reconciled. She cried, seemed to have passed out, and then the phone hung up. I ignored what she said. I know I'm not lucky. I'm just cherishing and loving everything in front of me. I continued to spend every day happily with my sister and Chase. And occasionally I would greedily think how happy it would be if it could always be like this. But the good times didn't last long. My illness worsened. One day, I suddenly started coughing up blood again, staining my piano. Chase and my sister both looked at me anxiously. Their voices were always in my ears. I wanted to comfort them, but I couldn't say another word. When I was sent to the hospital, I had already fallen into a coma. I only remember my sister and Chase holding my hand. Their body temperature was transmitted to me, warming me. It's the warmest, gentlest temperature I can feel in this world. I thought vaguely, it's so good, thank God, to give me another chance like this. Even if I die now, I have no regrets. And so I closed my eyes, falling into a long dream. Chase's side story. From the first time I saw her, my heart skipped a beat. The soft sunlight fell on her slender, flying fingers. The music flowing from her fingertips was as captivating as she was. That guy Drake really has no taste. But fortunately, she belongs to me now. She must be an angel. So cute, with 2 dimples when she smiles. She always has the scent of osmanthus cake on her. I don't want to see her cry. I know she doesn't have much time left. Don't cry. It's okay, it's okay. These scores, these melodies, these images, I will remember them forever. You will always be with me in my memory. I won't be lonely. I'm honored to have caught your tail at the last moment. Angel, I hope you can fly to me soon in the next life. Don't make me wait too long.